All right, ladies and gentlemen, it is 4:03, and I know I see people still popping on, but we'll go ahead and get started because we've got a lot to cover today, and we're trying to get you guys out of here a little early. So I know nobody's going to complain about that on a Friday evening, and it's beautiful outside. So again, we'll try to get that out of the way and get some stuff done. My name is Riley Beeman. I'm the Vice President of AUVSI North Carolina. And again, we'd like to thank everyone for tuning in today and spending your Friday evening with us. We've got a great panel of discussion that's going to take place today. But before I turn it over to our two heads to let them get everything going, I'm going to introduce a few people. And we've got somebody on the line that Darshawn wanted to make sure. He is in Chicago right now, so he will be in and out. So he will be coming on shortly. But before we get started, he wanted us to introduce Karen Allen with Skybrief and let her speak briefly about what's going on in case she may have to leave early. But Ms. Allen, thank you so much for being with us, and we'll turn it over to you to begin with.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Darsh reached out to me while we've been talking over the last couple of weeks. I have taken on an opportunity to be the managing editor of a new publication from North Carolina called North Carolina Skybrief. The background on North Carolina Skybrief is it is like a sister publication from the State Aviation Journal. And there is information out right now on my LinkedIn, which is under Karen Marie Allen, or it's on Facebook or Instagram. You can find the Skybrief link as well. But the publication will launch on May 6th. It is nothing, it's all information that pertains to North Carolina. It doesn't go outside our state. We're trying to really bring in and focus in on what our state is doing in the aerospace industry and in the aviation industry, and to share what technology and progress that we're making. So I met Darsh through a program that I did, a big STEM program that I did several years, for 4 years, and I did it out at the Division of Aviation. So I knew he was heavily into drones, and I know there's a lot of progress and technology being done in our state with drones. So I wanted to at least put my name out there, and I can send Darsh some more information that he can send to all of you if you'd like. But if you wanted to reach back out to me about content for this new issue and this new publication for North Carolina, I would really love the opportunity to talk to any of you or all of you. I think it's important that we keep it in North Carolina, obviously, but for people to learn more about what you're doing, especially with the regulations. So I don't want to take up a lot of time. I know Darsh got me on here at the last minute, and you do have a lot to cover, but basically this publication is for everything that's happening in North Carolina. So if there's something that's very, focused on North Carolina and that is changing, or the technology is progressing, or that people need to know and you want me to share it, I'll be glad to talk with you. And I hope that helps. Are there any questions I was real short, but I just wanted to make sure at least you knew that this was a new publication that will be out and that will be covering a lot of information.
Any questions for Miss Allen before we move on? And Miss Allen, thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely, thank you, Riley.
Absolutely, we look forward to hopefully having you on for our different streams every month, and maybe you can add to that and kind of tell us what's new in your world, and touch base with some of the guys that are on here as well. So any questions as far as for Miss Allen? All right, again, we want to thank her for being here. And what we'll do is very briefly, I'm just going to introduce some new team members that we've got on our executive board. We've got Kiana Wells. Kiana is an experienced construction management professional operating in the virtual construction and technology space. Kiana is our education outreach coordinator. So that's a new position we just filled. So we're very excited to have Kiana. Next, we have Andrew Elefant. He is our regulatory coordinator. Andrew is an experienced regulatory and policy leader in the transportation industry, particularly aviation and unmanned aircraft. So we are super glad to have Andrew, who is also going to be one of your moderators today. And then we also have Bhavika Wani. She is a flight safety officer with Amazon, Prime Air, CEO of AUVSI, and an aerospace engineer with UOC. She is our communications coordinator, so she's going to be taking a big role. You guys are going to see a lot coming from her, so we're glad to have her on the team. So those are 3 spotlights that we wanted to focus on today with 3 new team members. And again, they'll be here throughout the podcast or through the webinar. So if you guys want to ask any questions, we've also got some people weighing in from across the state and other states that we want to mention as well. We've got Ben Spain, program manager for the Department of Aviation. So that is awesome. So Ben and I have had the pleasure of working together in the past couple of weeks. So there's a lot going on with the state. I know that while he is here, he'll be able to answer some questions as well. From a state perspective, he's always open to that. We've got Wayne Bailey, who was State Fire Marshal's office, has his own drone company. He's doing a lot of education across the state as well with the K-12 system in North Carolina. A lot of new things that are coming out of that. So he will be able to speak on that if anybody's got any questions. And of course, our friends from the Lone Star State are on. So our AUVSI partners from the Lone Star State. So we're glad they're here and they can answer some questions of what's going on in their area. Again, we want to just really shift it over to our presenters right now to give them as much time as possible.
Right.
So, yes.
Sorry, just wanted to share a news also. So Adrian Doku, who is the president of AUVSI Lone Star, is now the council chair for AUVSI. So he just got appointed to that role, and just congratulations on behalf of AUVSI North Carolina.
Yes. So,
thank you.
Congratulations. We're always glad you're here, man. Always glad you're here.
Appreciate it.
So without further ado, and again, I will let our moderators introduce themselves a little bit. And if they want to go into a little bit about who they are and what they do, we are excited to have them on our team as well. And that is Ashley Felton. And again, Mr. Andrew Elefant, and I will turn it over to them.
Thanks, Riley. Can everyone hear me okay? Thumbs up. Good, okay. Technology is always iffy these days. There's been way too many Zoom calls and the technology is starting to just bug out on me. But anyway, I'm Ashley Felton. I'm the Advocacy Coordinator of our chapter. Very happy to be here today and moderate this panel. I'm a lawyer by trade, so anytime I get asked to moderate panels on legal topics, I get really, really excited because usually those are not the topics people want to hear on a Friday afternoon. So I'm very, very thankful you all are here, and I'll let Andrew introduce himself and kick off the panel.
Great, thanks. So my name is Andrew Elefant. I'm the regulatory coordinator for AUVSI North Carolina, and I'm also an attorney and a pilot and a drone pilot. So really excited to talk some drone law today. We have 2 guests joining us, Dawn Zoldi and Mary Caitlin Ray, and I'll let each of them quickly introduce themselves and their background.
Okay, I'll go. Hey, everybody, Dawn Zoldi here. I'm the CEO of P3 Tech Consulting. I'm also a licensed attorney, and I spent dedicated 28 years of service to the United States Air Force, 25 on active duty as a JAG, so military lawyer, and 3 as a civilian civil servant, 2 of those as a associate general counsel for the Secretary of the Air Force General Counsel's Office, and 1 on faculty at the Air Force Academy and Center for Character and Leadership Development. I wear many, many hats. Most recently, I was just appointed to be the president and CEO of UAS Colorado. That is the state's only 501c6 business league. So I'm really excited to partner with you guys on that and looking forward to the conversation. So thanks so much.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mary Caitlin Ray. I'm a counsel in the aviation group at Crowell-Moring's Washington, D.C. office. At Crowell, I focus on drone regulatory issues, business aviation regulatory issues, and also aircraft transactions. Before I joined Crowell-Moring, I worked in the FAA's Office of the Chief Counsel for 5 years, where I served as the lead procurement counsel to a number of drone and next-gen related programs, including the UAS IPP and the UPP. I'm thrilled to be here with all of you today. Just please know that my remarks aren't legal advice, but I'm looking forward to a great discussion.
And I think that's a great disclaimer for all of us.
Yeah, none of the attorneys on here are giving you legal advice. Sorry. All right, well, I can get it started. So the first topic we wanted to talk with Dawn and Mary Caitlin about was, as many of you know, there's a North Carolina case pending in our courts regarding our Board of Engineers and Surveyors and the licensing issues with drone pilots who have been assisting engineers and surveyors with photography and videography to be, used in a surveying capacity. So the Surveying Board of North Carolina, as has happened in many other states, has sort of come down hard on drone pilots who are not licensed engineers or surveyors who are conducting this type of business. And the drone argument against that is oftentimes the First Amendment argument, saying that the drone photography or videography is protected speech under the First Amendment. And as a government actor, these licensing boards cannot prohibit that activity per our Constitution. But also there's a question about whether or not the act of the videography or photography itself is actually violating any of those licensing rules. So that's sort of the general overview. So, Dawn and Mary Caitlin, what are your opinions on these surveying boards coming down on drone pilots and this whole First Amendment argument?
I mean, I'm happy to go first. So one of the hats I also wear is as an adjunct professor at CSU Pueblo. I teach in the Institute for Homeland Security. And one of the things I try to instill in my students is kind of going back to basics, really starting with the Constitution. And I don't think you can really have a conversation about this with first appreciating what the First Amendment says, and relevant to this case. It says that Congress shall make no law abridging freedom of speech. And so what happens here, as you kind of mentioned, Ashley, is if a government agency, in this case, I believe it's the Engineering and Surveying Commission, if they create a rule that somehow infringes on First Amendment, it depends. The analysis will depend on whether or not it actually directly targets speech. And so, is videography speech? The answer is yes. Is there government action in this case? Yes. And so the question is, what kind of judicial scrutiny will it be? Is it content based? And this is where I think really digging into what regulation they're applying matters. And because if it's a content based rule, okay, they will apply strict scrutiny. What does that mean? That means the government has to have a compelling government interest to do that law or to do that rule. And it has to be the least restrictive means to do that, to effectuate that compelling government interest. So there's a very high standard.
Dawn, you just got muted.
Yeah, that was weird. I saw that. So I don't know where, so I think I got to compelling government interest. Yes. Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're doing the strict scrutiny.
Yeah, strict scrutiny, compelling government interest, least restrictive means. And one case I wanted to bring up where recently it was a win here, it was Price versus Barr. So this one involved the Department of the Interior, and they had a pay-for-play commercial filming permit rule on DOI lands. And in that case, the National Press Photographers Association, or NPPA, was one of the parties that jumped in with a brief to the court. And ultimately, this was in the DC District Court, by the way. They struck it down because, for a number of reasons. They said that it was because it was targeting commercial filming, that was content based. And also it was targeting public forums, which in the case, right, it's a national park. And they applied strict scrutiny and struck that down. So again, not fully appreciating what this regulation actually says. That's like a key to this and to this analysis. I'll let Mary Caitlin jump in from here.
I think those are all really, really great points, Dawn, in terms of how the constitutional law applies here and what the legal analysis ultimately should be when they, as this makes its way through the courts and goes on up, how are the various courts going to be looking at this rule? I think from the practical side, I think, this could have really broad implications. For example, are these surveying boards going to take the same position with respect to, for example, DOT or NTSB entities needing a license? What about local law enforcement? All of those entities use, drones to collect information for photography, for videography. I think there becomes a question of where they draw the line. Are they just targeting these surveying board? These drone photographers, or are we going to see this start to expand in a hugely problematic way that's going to create a lot of red tape for every kind of user? Is this just where it starts? In terms of where there might be business opportunities for, suggested compromises have included, opportunities for subcontracting. Surveying companies are starting to use drones, but they're generally not, I think, as adept at using them as a lot of these sort of drone enthusiasts and drone specialists, right? So it's been suggested, I think, that there's an opportunity for the drone industry to partner with these surveying companies, but is that really a viable middle ground here when we're looking at a rule that could kind of leach its way out of just the surveying world, that it could be affecting a whole lot of other folks in the drone industry? So, I take sort of a practical viewpoint that this is going to affect a lot of folks in this industry and the way that they do business, and it could even grow from there. I think it's definitely concerning.
I like to jump back on because I think an important note here is the Institute for Justice is working with the drone service provider here, and they just had a win in Mississippi. So the Mississippi case, very similar, right? Involved two individuals, Brent Melton, Scott Dow. They had a company startup called Visalign LLC, and banks were basically hiring them to assess small properties. And the reason why they wanted that assessment is because underwriting requires that. It's for collateral for a loan. And so similarly, the Mississippi Board for Licensure for Professional Engineers and Surveyors sued those two gentlemen and that company. And ultimately, it went up, let's see here, in February 2020, the Fifth United States Circuit Court of Appeals affirmed that the First Amendment freedom of speech applies to occupational licensing laws like that of Mississippi's surveyor laws. And it was a major victory for free speech. Ultimately, the court sent it back down because that was an appellate court to the lower district court, but the case did settle. So if you're looking at precedent and what could be similar and where this could go, number one, it's the Institute for Justice representing both parties, right? The ones in Mississippi that prevailed and the North Carolina folks, they won in Mississippi. So I'm not a betting person, but again, facts matter. It depends on what this rule says, but it sounds to me like, it smells like First Amendment.
Yeah, and I think that's a great perspective to bring up the constitutional First Amendment part of the law. I mean, there's definitely both a practical side of it that Mary Caitlin brought up, and also a real constitutional First Amendment issue with doing some of these type of cases. I think one other interesting nugget to add here is, I mean, where do you think the line is or is going? I think an interesting piece of the puzzle is that a lot of these drone pilots are saying, I'm only doing this for advisory purposes. I'm only taking photographs. I'm not providing any surveying services or any other services that I would require a license to do so. Do you think that's a good approach to kind of just fall back behind I'm just advising, these are just for, you can do what you'd like with this information. I'm just giving you information without analysis. Do you think that will actually hold up?
I think it could. I mean, if they're just taking pictures and handing them over, does that equate to surveying? And words matter, definitions matter. What's the difference between surveying? What's the difference between surveying and mapping? And when you think about
right,
what we
which
do,
is a less legal word.
Yeah, right. I mean, when you look at the commercial drone expos, right, they all say, oh, here's our surveying and mapping vertical. They lump them together like they're the same thing. And looking at this case with Michael Jones in North Carolina, The Institute for Justice talks in a recent article about how it was actually in Forbes, surveying license. It's no joke. I mean, you're talking, first of all, you need a surveying related college degree, 16, or if you don't have that, you need 16 years of progressive practical experience, 9 of them almost like an apprenticeship practicing under a land licensed surveyor. I mean, that's pretty hardcore. And if these guys are just taking pictures and handing them over to the bank, is that really surveying? Is that the equivalent of this? I don't think so. I mean, but I guess time will tell. In Mississippi, they were able to win and say, hey, this is a First Amendment issue. Whether it's surveying or mapping or not, you're stepping on people's constitutional rights.
So taking off the lawyer hat with all this, do we think this sort of red tape or regulatory issue is needed? Is it protecting the public, or is this something that's just further holding back the drone industry and its capabilities?
I certainly think part of the equation here is as Dawn just summarized so well for us, a relatively high barrier to entry industry, trying to protect what it views as the business that it's carved out, right? I think that's a lot of what's going on here, especially given, the incredibly high barrier to entry. I mean, we had talked previously about actually comparing it to, the practice of law, right? When you're thinking about companies and individuals who jump through all of these hoops and dedicate all of this time, I'm interested to continue reading, what the arguments are in the case, because clearly they think they have one, right? They think that this is infringing on something that requires a license that they've worked really hard to get. So I think that's part of the motivation here.
I love that example, Mary Caitlin, because it cracks me up. There's a coffee mug that says, "Don't confuse your Google search with my law degree." But at the same time, right? People are free to speak about the law. I would hope that the general public would read regulations, would read the Constitution, and have opinions on it. Now, if they're walking into a courtroom and representing somebody, that's where I have to draw the line, right? You need to be barred. You need a license to do that. So to me, I think that's a great equivalent. Just taking pictures and handing them over to a bank, is that surveying? Or just talking about a statute that came out, or about whether a Texas legislative initiative is inappropriate. Is that practicing law without a license? I'd say no.
I got a question here up in New York. Do you guys hear me?
Go for it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Some of my work is VO. Some of my drone work is VO. And I work for a company up here that does mapping, serious mapping. We do it for government. We do it for local regulators. And we're up on Long Island. Most of it's done there. And one of the things that the owner of this company said was, we do not survey. Nowhere in our contracts say we survey. We just get information. Now we're doing mapping information. We're using ground control points. We're doing everything. We're giving them real map. We can give you elevations. We can give you how much dirt there is on the ground so the truck can come and pick it up and take it away. I mean, everything under the sun when it comes to mapping. So when I heard about this in North Carolina, it scared the hell out of me. It really did. New York is a lawyered up state. I know it, and we all know it. Okay, so what a great segue for people to make more money here, and that's my opinion, but I believe it. And in any event, where do you think this is really going? I mean, can we continue mapping projects? Can we do this? Personally, not because of anything that happened here or at the meeting or what we're talking about. I really do. I help people with their websites. I do marketing for realtors. I kind of just give pictures, but I work with these mapping people. And I don't want to see them lose their jobs. I don't want to see them get sued. They put in tons of money into their craft as well, and education. So there's got to be something there to protect us. How are we going to do that? How are we going to really protect us against this if it goes viral?
I think mapping and surveying are different. I mean, again, where do you get your definitions? There's obviously a surveying professional association. Look at the definition of what they're using. Honestly, I haven't looked it up, but what Wikipedia tells me is that surveying or land surveying is the technique, profession, art, and science of determining the terrestrial or three-dimensional positions of points and distances and angles between them. Sounds like there's a lot of analysis going into that. Okay, that's why it's a professional, association with that, as Mary Caitlin said, high barrier of entry. Mapping, okay, going back to my my handy dandy resource here, Wikipedia, is making a map or matching the process where points of one set are matched against points of another set, blah, blah, blah. It can be a two-dimensional representation of the surface of the world. It's basically a symbolic depiction emphasizing relationships between elements in space, objects, regions, or themes. They sound similar, but they're different. And what I'm hearing is the pictures people are taking and mapping are not surveying. So they're not going after these guys. They're going after these guys because they're saying what they're doing is surveying. And this is what's going to matter. What is surveying? What is mapping? What falls under the rules?
Can I weigh
Right,
in
but
on this?
We still have to defend ourselves if we get sued. You know, we're liable here because of what's going on in North Carolina. It's going to open up some problems for us. Is there any do you think that's true or false?
I think there's definitely a gray area that's, I think we've done a good job in this conversation about kind of narrowing in on what the gray area is. I think there's definitely a difference between giving information that you've gathered versus actually providing an analysis. And I think that's where this gray area is, and I think will be kind of continued to to be navigated. And to answer your question specifically, I think that there's a lot of licensing is becoming more commonplace for professions in general. And I think these type of conflicts are even more likely to keep occurring as other licensed professions bump up against other licensed professions. And I think as to what you can do as a drone service provider or something like that, I think is just be clear. By and large is probably a good advice. Just be clear about what you're doing, what your operations are. That's my 2 cents.
And John, you're smart to not use the word surveying in your documents, right? Use the word mapping. I think we have so many topics to cover, Andrew and Ashley. I'm wondering if we should transition maybe to the Michigan case or something.
Yeah, I was just about to move us forward in that direction. So I think we'll move on now. Andrew, do you want to introduce the Michigan case? Yeah,
absolutely. So a lot of this has been discussed in drone law circles for the last month or so. But in case you're unfamiliar, there was a case out of Michigan, and it's interesting that it was actually an appellate case in Michigan. And what that case was essentially someone was being monitored by the police because they were storing cars on their property or something. They were storing something on their property, and the police were trying to gather evidence that that this person was doing so. And in doing so, they used a drone to photograph his property. And all of this is a long story to say that ultimately this person sued the police because he argued that there was an expectation of property that he had, an expectation of privacy over his property. And I think the reason why this is such an interesting case is that it went a little bit further than previous ones in discussing the low altitude airspace and the legal rights that that folks have in low altitude airspace, and just what that expectation of privacy is. And so the conclusion of this case is, the current conclusion of this case is that this person didn't have they didn't have, or sorry, they did have an expectation of privacy because it was from such a low altitude. And I think that, you know, why this case is a great one to discuss is it really goes to the litigation about low altitude airspace and who can operate in there, and what sort of you know, how drones are different than traditional aircraft. And so, you know, I think to get us started, I think one great question to get us started is kind of, I think, Dawn or Mary Caitlin, can you walk us through kind of what your expectation of privacy is for aviation purposes?
First of all, I'm going to answer the question I wanted you to ask, and it's let's start again at the beginning with the Fourth Amendment and what it says and what it means. Okay, so the Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution, if any of you, you know, are steeped in United States history, this is all about protecting United States citizens from overreach of the government, just like our founding fathers and the colonial folks that settled this country were being abused basically by the British military. And so that's the genesis of the Fourth Amendment, and it's all about protecting people from the government. I want to foot stomp that, because this is not about private actors. This is about government actors. Okay, protecting that the government is required to get a warrant based upon probable cause, okay, before a neutral and detached magistrate, before they go into an area and search and seize evidence or information that's going to be used against that person. And unreasonable searches and seizures are then, that evidence is suppressed and cannot be used against the individual in court. Now, in this particular case, it was Lakewood Township, and it was all about enforcing a zoning and nuisance regulations. It was not the police, but the Constitution still applies to government actors. And that's why it applied here. Now, what they did was they hired a third-party drone service provider to take the pictures, and they flew over these people's backyard multiple times over a multiple year period to gather up the information. Now, how do you know if an expectation of privacy is reasonable? In other words, it has to be it has to be an unreasonable search and seizure. Therefore, you have to have a reasonable expectation of privacy. There's two parts. The first is subjectively. Does the person believe that do they personally believe and hold the belief that they have an expectation of privacy in this place where the government went? The second part is the objective expectation of privacy, objectively. This is the one that the case involved, because the objective standard is this an expectation of privacy that society is willing to say is reasonable? And that's a lot to unpack there. I'm going to hand it off to Mary Caitlin here to talk about some of the aviation cases, because there is other than this, no unmanned aircraft case that ever went to the Supreme Court involving search and seizure and reasonable expectation of privacy. Over to you, Mary Caitlin.
Sure. Thanks, Dawn. And as Dawn noted, I'm an aviation lawyer, right? So I look at this from the perspective of, you know, what do the FAA regulations say about these kinds of issues? How does this jive with how the FAA has been treating drones thus far? Or how does it not jive with how the FAA has approached regulating these new entrants? And I'd have to say, I feel like it's pointing out an inconsistency, because, as I'm sure a lot of folks on this call have found, the FAA has repeatedly approached drones as being similar to manned aircraft, right? And when we look at how the FAA is issuing regulations, how they are, issuing type certificates or proposing to issue type certificates, they're trying to squeeze the drones into their existing aviation framework that was traditionally designed for manned aircraft. So whether we think that works or doesn't work, that's the position that they've taken in the path that we're currently on. That's why we have all of these waivers and exemptions, and we're trying to, force drones to operate in a space and in a way that they inherently don't, because they're unmanned. I think that this also highlights airspace issues and inconsistencies in how the court is viewing space issues and how the FAA has continued to view airspace issues, which I'm sure we'll talk about later on this call as well. But the FAA's position is still from the blades of grass to the sky. So, the FAA is certainly not looking at low altitude airspace any differently, just because the aircraft is inherently different. And that's kind of what the court is saying here, that, drones are different because of their inherent characteristics, because they can go into spaces where manned aircraft can't go. And the FAA has long been saying, our jurisdiction over low altitude airspace and over drones, no matter how small they are, is the same as, a Boeing 737. If it flies in the air, it's in the national airspace, it's our territory. And so, when I've been looking at this case, that's the kind of the angle that I've been looking at it from, is how is this different or not different from what we're seeing from the FAA, and what does that mean for the future? Are we going to reach a point where we have to reconcile, FAA regulations with what the courts are starting to say about drones?
Hey, Mary Caitlin, one thing I will say is, interestingly enough, this appellate court, actually focused in part of the reasoning on the fact that the rules for drones are somewhat different than manned aviation by virtue of the fact the FAA pushed out Part 107. And so they actually put that as part of their rationale. Like, yeah, maybe they're trying to put it in the same box, but you know what? They actually created a separate rule. And for that reason, drones are also different. And here's why it matters, everybody. The only cases we have are aerial cases involving manned aircraft, okay? And so there's a couple from the 1980s. And by the way, context matters. You remember anybody like 80s children, okay? War on drugs, okay? So the two cases that go up to the Supreme Court involve drug cases. And these were criminals that were, criminals growing marijuana in their backyard, okay? Half the, a bunch of states, including my own Colorado, it's all legal now. But at the time, that was very, very bad. And what happened was two cases. One was California v. Serralo. In Serralo, the law enforcement in this case flew a manned airplane 1,000 feet above ground level over the respondent's enclosed backyard curtilage. By the way, curtilage is a fancy word for the area right attached to your house, immediately surrounding it. By the way, normally a search of curtilage without a warrant is usually per se or automatically intrinsically unreasonable under the Fourth Amendment. So they're flying in. Go ahead, what? I'm sorry. So they're flying an airplane, okay, the cops in Serralo in California, 1,000 feet above ground over the backyard, and you couldn't see this from the naked eye. They find marijuana, they take a bunch of pictures, they take this guy to court, use the evidence. It goes all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court says, oh, well, look, the plane flew within, quote, public navigable airspace in, this is important, everybody, a physically non-intrusive manner. Take that on board for a second, ruminate, where anyone else flying could have seen that marijuana. So therefore, no objectively reasonable expectation of privacy. The second case, Riley, is in Florida, and it's also a dude's got marijuana in his backyard, except for he's got a greenhouse. Okay, so it's cloudy on the sides. You can't see it from the street, but from above, you can. And so what do? They rent a helicopter, the police. They fly 400 feet above ground level over his greenhouse, take a bunch of pictures, take him to court. Once again, goes all the way up to Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court says, once again, legally flying within the limits of navigable airspace. All right. Does it end there? Well, I would say no, because there's a couple other cases. Now, in Michigan, what they used and they focused on was a 2001 case. So not the 1980s anymore. Fast forward to 2001. It's called Kylo. And Kylo versus the United States, again, Supreme Court of the United States, involved the Department of Interior's use of advanced surveillance technology. So what they did was the cops stood outside of the curtilage, beamed a thermal imaging technology at the house to see, and not only see kind of inside the house, like and the heat that would emanate from marijuana plant lighting, and the heat that would come from that. That thermal imagery actually also emanated from to outside of the house, from inside as well, which is kind of weird and interesting. Kylo, they struck it down, said it was illegal. It violated the Fourth Amendment because what they focused on there, it was an uncommonly used device that was used to intrude upon the house that otherwise would have required physical entry. All right. And so all over the map here, you got your drug cases with manned aircraft, you got Kylo that this court relies upon. And it's just kind of interesting. A lot of people have criticized the court's use of Kylo and said, no, you gotta focus on the aircraft cases. And hey, you know, it's up in the sky, it's all good. We can see, it's almost like plain view. Well, is that right? I mean, I think a lot of people on these cases get really wrapped around the axle, especially drone service providers, that somehow it's going to kill their business. Remember, go back to the Fourth Amendment. This is all about the government's action vis-a-vis citizens. And oh, by the way, should they have just gotten a warrant? It's not that they can't get that evidence. It's what are they supposed to do to get it? And that's really what needs to be focused on here, not the private drone service provider that happened to be taking those pictures as an agent of the government. And that's all I'll say about that.
No, I think that was a great rundown of aviation and privacy law. You know, and I think that is really the novelty of this, and I think you identified that really well, Dawn, is that you know, the Supreme Court has said that, you know, 1,000 feet in a plane, that's not a reasonable expectation. 400 feet in a helicopter, that's not a reasonable expectation. But, you know, where does the line go with drones? And so I think that's why a lot of people are watching this case, just to see, you know, to Mary Caitlin's point, just to see how the law is going to treat drones differently than traditional manned aircraft. And, you know, especially when the FAA has taken the stance that drones are aircraft, drone pilots are pilots. And so from that side of things, you know, the writing on the wall is pretty clear from the FAA. And so it's interesting seeing the litigation catch up to, I think, where the industry is at. So this is definitely one to watch.
Well, you can't talk about these cases without talking about Jones. And it was shocking that the court didn't even talk about Jones. Okay. So Jones is another Supreme Court case, by the way. And it was it was from 2012, involved GPS tracking. In this case, the cops stuck a GPS tracker underneath the bottom of this guy's car, a criminal, on the street, and they persistently tracked him for 29 days straight. Used all that information and evidence against him in court to show kind of what he was doing, where he was going, to weave this intricate web of his connections and what he was doing. I think it was a drug case, if I recall correctly. The Supreme Court of the United States struck that down as being illegal. Okay, think about this, everybody. The car was parked on the street. You could have followed that car in a police car every single day. And they struck it down. Why? They said they used a trespass theory. And they said the cops stuck this thing on their car and did persistent surveillance using GPS for 29 days. That is not reasonable. They should have gotten a warrant. And why this Jones case is important is because the concurring opinions, and that's where some other justices, you know, they agree with the end result, but they want to make their own comments. Maybe they get there a little bit different path than the majority does. They raised a lot of issues about emerging technologies and this idea of persistent surveillance. And at what point then do you need a warrant? And is it okay for the township, right, to go back multiple times and fly a drone, as Mary Caitlin said, can go in places, you know, that maybe manned aircraft can't go, fly it there multiple times over a multiple year period to gather evidence against these people, when, oh, by the way, once again, they could have gotten a warrant. And you know what? If they couldn't have got a warrant, then guess what? They shouldn't have been there. Think about that for a second.
Yeah, I think that's a great point.
Hey guys, I deal with this all the time with my clients up here. The first thing I say to my clients are Fourth Amendment rights. I have to respect them. It's the first thing that comes out of my mouth when I know there's going to be other people that are going to be filmed in some way. What I try to do is actually, if there's any people in the area, I will go down and hand my business card to them and say, this is what we're doing. And in cases with these people, they appreciate it. And they go, thank you very much, because we're not sure what you're doing. So, it's called transparency as well. So when we're trying to do these things, try to be as transparent to the people around you and very much the client, so it doesn't get the client in trouble.
Yeah, John, unless you're working for the government, the Fourth Amendment won't be your issue. The privacy you're mentioning is a state level privacy, which is a little bit different. It falls under the 10th Amendment and the state's police powers, includes privacy, nuisance, trespass, and things like that. Some of the laws you see at the state level involving that, but your practice is a good one. Hey, Andrew, did you want to pivot to, we got so much to cover here.
Yeah. So actually I think this was a great, this was a good discussion. And I think it would be great to pivot to an adjacent issue, which is something that has just really recently been in the news. But the whole notion of avigation is something that's been in the news lately. Even I think Darshan posted something on this with some thoughts the other day. And so it would be great to talk about avigation easements for a few minutes. Just to introduce the topic, avigation is kind of a combination of aviation and navigation, and this is the idea that that governments could give aviation easements of airspace for certain airspace, and there's a lot of implications that can come from that, be it tracking, be it user fees, and so just introducing the topic of avigation, would love to kind of hear some thoughts on that from Dawn and Mary Caitlin and other folks if they have questions.
Mary Caitlin,
you too, Darshan, if you have a thought on that too.
I'll let Mary Caitlin take this first stab, and then love to elaborate on that.
Sure. Yeah, and I'll give you a sense of how I have encountered this issue before. I know that it's been getting a lot of concerning press in the drone industry lately, and I think for good cause. But another side of the coin is that, I work with a lot of clients who have aerial easements already in place over, whether it's over linear infrastructure, like power lines. A lot of the railroads will have aerial easements over their track, things like that. And I think the other side of the coin to avigation easements is the possibility to be able to monetize that space and to be able to use it in a safe way. So I'm thinking, if I put on my drone operator hat and I want to be able to operate beyond visual line of sight, point to point, and it happens to line up with a nearby railroad track that already has an aerial easement in place. I know that the railroads no one's done it yet, but they're all very, very interested, especially once package delivery gets off the ground, so to speak, in how they can utilize that previously unutilized space, and probably for a way that benefits both the rail industry and the drone commercial package industry. As the drone operator, that's a great case to make to the FAA, whether you're operating under the newly rolled out 135 for package delivery system, or you're operating under 107 and you need a beyond visual line of sight waiver. There will be no people on the ground. There will be no other intruding aircraft, because there cannot be by law. Now, I know, having worked with the FAA on issues like this before, they still want to know what you'll do if someone ends up, underneath the drone and they shouldn't be there. And the answer that there shouldn't be anyone there is never good enough. They still want to know what you're going to do if someone ends up in this easement where they shouldn't be, or if there's converging aircraft. But it really gives you, I think, a leg up in the waiver process, or if you're trying to establish, for package delivery, if you're looking for a flight route for package delivery under 135. And I know specifically that the rail industry is really interested in looking at this. They're looking at it really hard because they already do a number of subterranean easement leases for like broadband internet, and that's worked out really well for all parties involved. So that's how the rail industry is looking at it. I know that a lot of the power companies that maintain linear infrastructure are looking at it in similar ways, not only for their ability to lease some of these easements, but more so for them to use them for themselves or to contract out, say, drone inspection flights that are conducted beyond visual line of sight within that aerial easement. So it's a way of kind of showing that this airspace is protected and therefore it can be safely used for drone operations. Now, where I think it does present a problem is when you start looking at, airspace ownership and when it starts being used as a way to keep everyone out instead of a way of allowing expanded operations to be conducted. And I think that's a very fine line to walk. I think it's, I don't envy the folks who are going to have to work on the policy issues surrounding this. How do we use easements in a way that allows, safer commercial drone operations in specific areas without also allowing these easements to be used to keep drone operators out? Because I think that's a very real possibility too, right? If we're going to allow people to put these easements in place that permit certain drone operations, what's to say that, those same easement system can't be used by landowners who want to keep drone operators out? And I think that's a big concern.
So I'm going to do a little bit of the flip side of what Mary Caitlin just talked about, because she's talking more about private actors, railroad companies, other folks like that. Let's talk about the government, because that is what people are concerned about right now. Some laws coming out, proposed legislations in a number of states creating these kind of easements. Once again, go back to the Constitution. What we're talking about here is the Fifth Amendment, okay? And the portion of the Fifth Amendment we're talking about is not self-incrimination. It's the part that says it prohibits the government from infringing on a person's right to life, liberty, or property. And as Mary Caitlin just alluded to, air rights are considered property. Like, there is Supreme Court case law that says that. That's a done deal. That's why, for example, the railroads, they can sell you and lease you an easement of the air above their land because it is property. The question is, what about when the government wants to mess with your property and says, we are going to do this, right? We are going to get an easement. Now, guess what? The government can actually take your property. What the Constitution tells them is they actually have to pay just compensation for it. It's called the takings clause. So when they take your property without your permission, it's called eminent domain. And you've read about this. There's some cases going on, right, where they want to build a highway or do this and that. It's encroaching on neighborhoods. They take the property. They got to pay them off. They got to pay just compensation. And so that is the issue here when you're talking about avigation rights. Can the government do it? I'm going to say yes. How they do it and whether they pay you for it, that's the Fifth Amendment issue. Okay, so this whole idea that, all this needs to get struck down because it violates the Constitution. No, what it means is the government has to pay you for it if you're the property owner. That's what it means. So they can do these things. So I think that's really important because, once again, I think people, they go a little sideways sometimes on these issues. You got to go back to the Constitution when you're talking about the United States, when you're talking about state government, local government, state, local, tribal, territorial, and of course, federal government. By the way, tribal, holy shnikes, whole different set of rules. We don't have time to talk about tribal today, but I do have an article about that way back when in Insight on Manned Systems magazine. Go check it out. It's on my website, p3techconsulting.com. All my articles are up there. I've talked about most of these issues, written about them.
Yeah, and I think these are some great points. I think especially especially Mary Caitlin's point about they're really kind of two big groups with some differing motives here. There are definitely some bigger companies that have property, that have assets, that that are really important to them and that can be monetized. And you know, on the flip side, though, that you know, there's definitely a public policy issue when a single landowner can create a no-fly zone around their property, and you know, the public policy implications of that are definitely complicated, especially when it gets down to the individual level. You know, a railroad, I think, is a great example of something that's rarely going to interfere. But I think that from the landowner perspective, you know, there's definitely a public policy issue here. And you know, just to provide a little bit of extra color, this is something that has been discussed a lot the last few years. Especially kind of on the legal front of things. The Uniform Law Commission, the American Law Institute, both of them are grappling with this issue of low altitude airspace and the property rights that people have above that property. So this is something that's definitely an unsettled area of law and has some big policy implications as well. So I think that was it was really helpful to dive into Avigation.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm Jim Semerad up in Michigan, and I got to take 30 seconds here, and then I'll ask my question. But retired Marine Corps general was testing out a drone for the Defense Department on Lake St. Clair between the U.S. and Canada, and he ended up getting under a lot of criticism. People on both sides, Canada and the U.S., pulled down their pants and mooned him, so because they knew that the cameras were on. So anyway, by popular opinion, the DOD did not pursue that contract. They canceled the contract because they didn't want the bad press. So I also think, and I applaud this topic because I believe we need more law and Supreme Court decisions on the drone business. And I think there's already a lot of law in place, you know, with regards to, say, peeping toms. I mean, you don't want a drone flying up and just, you know, on your property, looking in your window and videotaping you taking a shower, right? So, you know, I think there's laws in place to kind of avoid that. You know, what inspires me is that in a national emergency, when the Coast Guard, and I was talking to Captain Kelly last week, Coast Guard Sector Detroit, I said, are you using drones right now for search and rescue? And they said, not really. You know, we really haven't done a lot with that right now. They're playing around with it, but, you know, obviously that's an area where, you know, if I'm in distress because of a natural disaster, hey man, helicopters, drones, whatever you got, you know, I don't care. But we do need some laws to define the boundaries of what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. So there's a lot of laws that have to be written on the books with regards to this. My question though, okay, I got involved, and that actually through AUVSI, AFWorks, with the Air Force. They lost a base to a hurricane in Florida, and they're now rethinking what does an Air Force base look like. So if I took a drone and I flew it into Air Force space, I'm in violation because technically there's an invisible fence. Even though there's not a physical fence there, there is a boundary there. But I can go up 100 feet or 150 feet and look and see what's on the base if I want to, find out if there's nuclear bombs or whatever over there, whatever it is. So do we have some, my question is, and is that embedded in the laws right now as to what you can and cannot do in terms of looking on a military base? And obviously in Oceania, you know, if you're in the airspace for the Navy or the Air Force, I mean, you're in violation of FAA rules. But from a drone perspective, you know, an Air Force base or Selfridge, I think there's an invisible boundary that is where the perimeter fence is, and it goes up is high. I'm not sure if there's a limit whether it's 150 feet or 200 feet, where you're protected. I mean, I could be right on that barrier to the Air Force base and fly a drone up at what, 200 feet, 250 feet? I'm not sure what that number is, but can you provide a little clarity on that?
Yeah, and so I think that's a good question, and you know, I think I'm probably not the best person to speak to the military airspace side of this, but you know, I think I'm happy to let Dawn chime in on that. But I think the one point that I'll make is that a lot of the privacy laws that you're talking about are state laws, and they're not federal laws. So that's really, you know, things like nuisance. Those are state laws that don't have anything to do with the FAA. But Dawn, please chime in.
Yeah, so there's no magical number. What you're talking about there's the military has basically worked with the FAA pretty much for almost every single installation in the continental United States to get, as you called it, an invisible bubble over it, special security instruction. If you go on Know Before You Fly, that should be popping up. Like if you're flying somewhere and looking. Now, can the military, police, security forces, Air Force Office of Special Investigations come at you if you're like filming what I would call like classified, you know, or protected property? Yeah. You know, it depends on where you are, what you're doing. So that's the lawyer answer. It depends. But there are definitely special security instructions that cover military installations. Hey, Andrew, we're like running short on time. I would love to get to race day quads.
Yeah.
Happy to inject 5 seconds. Again, up in Michigan, if you're doing surveying, that is a license. So if you are a surveyor, you have to be registered with the state to do surveying. Yes. Over.
Yeah, thanks for adding that. And yeah, I think just in the interest of time, we'd love to switch gears and just go into one last case. So the one that we're gonna talk about now is the remote ID lawsuit going on, and you know, I'm happy to let Dawn lead us off on that one, but that's the race day quads lawsuit that Dawn's referring to about the remote ID rules and specifically kind of the hobbyist modeler community.
Yes, if you want the latest information, check out Jonathan Ruprecht's website. He's the attorney. There's a couple attorneys actually on this case, but his website's probably the most robust, along with Tyler Brennan, Race Day Quads website. You know, they posted up all the documents they received under the Freedom of Information Act request to the FAA over a period of almost 2 years. So the latest and greatest there, basically, yes, they filed, it's not technically a lawsuit, it's a petition. It's under the Administrative Procedures Act. It basically challenges the rule on a number of grounds under that act. And the latest and greatest is they just filed on April 15th, a statement of issues to be raised for judicial review. There's 4 bases. And I think I'm going to have permission to post that up here shortly. I will get back to you, but basically failure to follow, you know, the law, statutory rights. Second thing, that the actions were arbitrary and capricious, failure to follow procedures, and constitutional arguments. So you're wondering to yourself, what are those constitutional arguments? And what I will say is they're going to be filing a brief here shortly. It's going to be a 30-pager. And it's going to be chock full of information. So remember that Jones case I told you about, where the cops stuck a GPS tracker on the car and it violated the 4th Amendment. How about a rule that requires you to buy a GPS tracker and stick it on your drone and lets the cops track you persistently? Think about that for a second. So I'm not saying that that's going to be in the brief, but could it be? Sure. Mary Caitlin.
Thanks, Dawn. Yeah, and I think in terms of kind of threading the needle here, a lot of the themes we've been talking about, you know, I think another big issue in this case is determining what constitutes navigable airspace, right? If one of the arguments is that, you know, the FAA's definition of the NAS is too broad, the way it's undertaking to to claim that it has this broad jurisdiction over all of the navigable airspace is, as John said, arbitrary and capricious. I think, as we discussed in both of the earlier cases, a lot of it comes down to what is a safe altitude now. I mean, Congress has recognized as far back as the Air Commerce Act in the 1926, that navigable airspace is the airspace above minimum safe flight altitudes. And the problem we're having now is that minimum safe flight altitudes are getting lower and lower. And again, we've got this kind of conflict between what the FAA is saying, that's a minimum safe flight altitude. We're going to, expand our jurisdiction to the blades of the grass. I think the question becomes, is that arbitrary and capricious? And so I think, is the outcome of this case going to change, the rulemaking? Maybe, maybe not, but I think it will definitely have an effect on this broader conversation that we've all been having in the industry about how, how the FAA may or may not regulate this, very specialized airspace that's, only recently become navigable because of a significant development in technology that's different than anything that we've seen before.
And let's go back to the basics, kind of not the Constitution in this case. I want to focus on one of the statutory arguments, right? So when you think about the Administrative Procedures Act, everybody, when the notice came out, the NRPM or NPRM, the NPRM, Notice of Public Rulemaking. Well, where's that coming from? It's coming from the Administrative Procedures Act. And the reason why that act exists is because, there was a decision by Congress that they don't want a bunch of federal agencies making rules that impact people's rights, that impact people's livelihoods without giving the public an opportunity to review that rule and comment on it, and in turn have the agency consider them and significant comments they're supposed to respond to. Okay, 53,000 comments on this rule. How many of those arguments were specifically responded to? And I'm not talking every argument, right? We know there was a bunch of cut and pasting going on. Significant arguments. Kenji Sugihara from the Drone Service Providers Alliance, go look up his comments. He talked about the Carpenter case, he talked about Jones, he talked about Fourth Amendment case law, Supreme Court case law. Guess what? Did you look at the comments that came back? Nobody discussed those. And so if that is a requirement, which it is, and that was not done, then the remedy is the rule gets blown up, it's called vacated, and you have to go back and fix it. And so that could very well be the result, depending on how this all plays out. 30 pages of arguments, 4 different significant bases under the Administrative Procedures Act and the Constitution. More to follow for sure. Keep an eye out.
Yeah, and could definitely have some very significant implications for the industry. I mean, especially if it was a very significant decision like vacating it or something like that. But I think that and I appreciate the Procedures Act walkthrough.
Hey, Andrew, just 1 second,
yeah.
though. I do, I know we're closing out here shortly. I do want to say something because I think there's a myth going around that if the rule gets blown up, it's going to set the industry back for decades. Think about what this rule is about. It is about giving security agencies information, period. It has nothing to do with unmanned traffic management because network wasn't included and they moved out. And oh, by the way, look at what Europe's doing. They have a remote ID rule. They have a network solution for UTM, and they're moving out on UTM. So what everybody needs to be focused on to move the industry forward is how are we doing on UTM? Are we there yet? Because remote ID is not necessarily a prerequisite or a stepping stone like we're hearing. I know that's controversial. I'd love to, I'm sure there's going to be blowback from that. But again, this rule is about giving security agencies information for counter UAS, period. That's what it's about.
Yeah, and really, really interested to see how this one plays out. Especially. We have time for one more agenda item. I don't think that we have time to get into a full discussion on another case. But I think one agenda item I wanted to give a quick plug for that you've probably seen in the news lately is the Aviation reporting service. And it's recently opened up for UAS operators to provide safety reports in the safety reporting system. I'd love to get a quick take from Dawn and Mary Caitlin about just what the safety system, like what the safety reporting system is for the man side, and what to tell some folks who might be afraid to participate.
I'm going to let Mary Caitlin take the man side because she was definitely knee deep in that in the FAA when she was there.
Sure, yeah, and I continue to be so. A lot of my clients now have to deal with voluntary reporting systems. So I was really happy to hear about this development. I work all the time with the Voluntary Disclosure Reporting System, also known as the VDRP program. That's been in place for a long time for your repair stations, for your air carriers, your Part 135, the charters, smaller carriers, and the Part 121s, your flag carriers. It's been a hugely important piece of the culture of safety and trust that's maintained between those certificate holders and the FAA. And as we all know, the man industry has an advantage in that they have this established culture with the FAA. They know which offices they work with, and there haven't been a whole lot of changes to those offices. They have established relationships. There are expectations on both sides, not just on the industry side. There are expectations on, that the industry has of the FAA, of how the FAA is going to treat their information. And to some degree, there's some, I think, predictability of how those communications will work. And a lot of that is because of these types of voluntary reporting systems in which the certificate holder reports some incident of noncompliance that they've received. And if they report it to the FAA immediately, and here's the big one, if it's an incident of noncompliance of a certain type, so if it meets certain requirements, and I'll talk more about those in a second, and if the certificate holder goes on to fully correct the instance of noncompliance, the FAA is almost surely not to pursue any sort of enforcement action or civil penalty. And what's most important to a lot of certificate holders is that the FAA doesn't make a public announcement of any type of, they've had a finding of noncompliance. In general, that information is protected under FOIA. And so anytime a carrier has an issue of noncompliance, there's two sides of the coin that are of concern, right? There's the FAA side. How much trouble could we get in for this, right? Are we talking civil penalties? Could our certificate be revoked? But then there's also the PR side. Is this going to be something that, customers, clients are going to see? Are we going to lose face in the industry? Is this going to affect our business if it's made public? So that's one of the kind of, I think, main motivations to establishing this VDRP program on the manned side is that certificate holders can make these reports. It's all online now, which I'm sure, Andrew, you probably know more about the ASRS than I do, but it's you submit online and then you have you kind of your own dashboard and you can keep track of your voluntary reports, and you'll see, as the FAA starts to close them out, they become officially closed. You don't have to worry about them anymore. Now, the catch is that the specific instance of noncompliance has to be both immediately reported, fixed, and most importantly, it has to fall in the category of sort of these forgivable offenses or forgivable instances of noncompliance. And the FAA is kind of vague about that. The FAA's definition of, let me pull it up here, it's that the instance of noncompliance cannot be related to a lack of qualifications or questions related to the certificate holder's ability to hold its certificate. So the biggest example I see is issues with drug and alcohol compliance. They gave the wrong test to the wrong employee. More often than not, the FAA says, big whoop, fix it, give them the right test. Other, instances I've seen in the operational space are, if a pilot or a carrier blows an altitude, there are a lot of reports that come in about stuff like that. So I think that this is the type of program that is really important for the UAS industry to kind of start to fold them in, so to speak, into this culture of safety. And so that the industry and the FAA can start to develop more of a longstanding mutual kind of trust. Now, I certainly wouldn't encourage any one of my clients to make a voluntary disclosure unless they had reviewed it very carefully and were sure that it fit into this category. And you figure that out by kind of looking at what previous VDRPs or previous voluntary disclosures have been closed out. But at the end of the day, it's really important to have a good relationship with your FAA inspector. In the case of operators, the FSO, which they call them now, that has jurisdiction over your operations. Because at the end of the day, they can kill you with their pen, right? They can ground your operation, and this is just one of, I think, a piece of the puzzle of kind of establishing those working relationships and building that trust.
Mary Caitlin, just to clarify, that you're focusing on the manned side. I know they just launched the unmanned side, but the unmanned side doesn't have essentially this quasi-privilege kind of, right? You're talking like this grace, right? So in other words, the exception you're talking about where they're not going to take action, I see Daryl Green just said, for the ASRS report does not prevent a finding of a violation, only imposition of the sanction. So does that grace apply to the unmanned side or only the manned side at this time? Like they're asking drone operators to self-report, but they're not really giving them this, fuzzy feeling that, hey, but if you do it first and it falls within this kind of category, you're going to be okay. Like that's not out there yet, right?
So that I don't know how ASRS has actually worded it in their guidance documents, but the VDRP program doesn't prevent the finding of a violation. It almost just, because the violation is almost, it's self-proclaimed, right? I mean, you definitely, if you blew an altitude, you violated a regulation. And so it doesn't preclude a finding of a violation, but it does, as you say, it sort of gives a vague promise of that there will be no enforcement and that there will be no public announcement of the incident.
And as Daryl said, there's an advisory circular that describes all of this in more detail. And I think the other relevant part of this is you may have heard this referred to by general aviation pilots or other pilots as a get out of jail free card. It's not that. And I think the one really important thing to note is this does not cover doing things that are illegal. This doesn't cover accidents causing damages. This is, I've inadvertently done something that I shouldn't have done or is against the regulations. I'd like to tell you about it in the hopes that other people cannot make the same mistake. But don't assume that you can just fill out one of these reports and everything will be absolved and everything will be fine. There is definitely some nuance to it. But as a safety tool and a safety culture tool, as this develops further, I think UAS pilots will have more certainty about the type of interactions that they'll have with the ASRS, and so I think in time some of these questions will definitely be answered.
Hey, I know we're getting to the end of our time. You've got a lot to cover. Could we take like just a 2-second wrap up from Mary Caitlin and myself? Yep,
that would be perfect.
Okay.
So yeah, we're gonna wrap it up now, but would love to kind of get some closing thoughts from Dawn and Mary Caitlin.
Yeah, this was a ton of fun. I'm a nerd and I love talking about this stuff. We created, if you guys have an iPhone and you haven't joined Clubhouse, it's drop-in audio chat, do it. Adrian is very, very active on that. I've created a Drone Law Connections Club, and we meet every Thursday at 11 Mountain. So check us out, come on in. We're focusing on international drone regs this month as a theme. And this coming Thursday, we're talking about Europe with the one of the former folks from AUVSI, Yves Morier. So please join us. I also have a podcast, Drones at Dawn, every Monday at 8 a.m. Mountain Time. Join us. Again, our theme in the Clubhouse is tracking my podcast. And so a good synergy there. Hope to see y'all there. out here. Thanks again. Thanks again for having us.
Thanks, Dawn.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Please do feel free to reach out to me if you have any follow-up questions. Definitely follow me on LinkedIn. I know my firm page also we post a lot of regular posts about regulatory updates, specifically everything that's going on with 107. We post a lot of content that's related to drone operators and manufacturers who are also government contractors. So those of you who have government contracts concerns, whether FAA or any other agency, we have great resources for you as well. Thanks again for having us.
Yeah, I really appreciate both of you joining us. Riley, I think we're back to you.
Yes, sir. And again, thank you guys for being a part of this. Just echoing Andrew and Ashley, thank you so much for being a part of today. It was a great panel, great information, a lot of information. And I know there's a lot of questions. Hopefully, after we finish up, if some folks want to hang around, they can and ask those questions. But our company spotlight today, we want to talk about Wilstair, and that is Mr. Will Stavania. And Will, I hope I pronounced that right. Will is an aerospace engineer with over 20 years of experience in various technical and operational management roles. Today, he serves as an owner and lead consultant with Wilstair. In his role, he provides technical product development and support to other UAS companies and end users. His services range from systems engineering, technical product specifications and testing to architectural software development. Although he is a fixed wing aficionado, he has designed, built, and integrated various types of multi-rotor platforms as well as specialized payloads for commercial flight operations. And we would like to thank Will for being a part of today and also have this time to turn it over to him to talk about the company.
Well, thank you. Great introduction. I appreciate it, Riley. Yeah, so I'm here in the North Carolina area. I'm going to try to share my screen if that works for everyone here. Let's see if I can do that. And if it doesn't work, please let me know. All right, can you guys see at least our intro summary slide here?
You're good.
Okay, well, great. Well, thank you. So I'll try to walk through this very quickly. I mean, a little bit about who we are, what we do. So, you know, like Riley just mentioned, we are an engineering firm for the most part. We work on very strategic type of projects. Integration is one of the things that's happening in the industry right now is that you're seeing a large number of companies who are dedicating their resources and effort into developing their own individual products, right? So it leaves the end user with a little bit of a void in how everything is brought together, and that's one of the things that we do. We do very specialized type of projects, and we'll share a little bit more about what are some of those type of projects. But it's from the basic project management all the way to engineering, architectural designs as well. We've done we've been around for a while now, since 2016. So we've done all kinds of big and small type of projects. And early days, we used to build these small drones that we would use inside of river creeks and do water type of analyses. Today is a little bit more complex type of systems with a lot of software and technical API type of integrations, and of course, hardware just keeps evolving every year. A little bit about our projects. We, for the most part, a lot of many folks in the industry know us primarily from our work in GPS and night autonomy. So we've been in the supply chain now for 4 years. We've started flying drones manually, and not so much flying the drone, but integrating a specific hardware. So customers used to contact us and say, hey, we use these type of scanners, or we're using RFID readers. Can you turn this into a drone? And that's exactly what we did. We would take dedicated hardware that they were already using, and then we would develop, basically integrate them into flying camera systems. Today, that's evolved quite a bit, and to the point where now we're we've had the opportunity to work with in GPS denied environments, and this is, I'm talking about complete autonomy, from the drone being on a schedule, flying completely autonomous inside of very narrow aisles, scanning hundreds of thousands of SKUs within a warehouse, for example, performing inventory management tasks. And I get the question often, well, why did you decide to work in probably one of the hardest technical challenges there is? Frankly, it is a very rewarding area, just because as you guys might have had the opportunity to see, there's a warehouse popping up, fulfillment centers. The way how our demand, especially these days, of online type of packages and so on, continues to grow, and supply chain is one of the industries that I've had the opportunity to see evolve very rapidly. I mean, they're very good about adopting new technologies, and of course, self-flying robots happens to be one of them. Likewise, we've done a number of projects around last mile logistics, so delivery. So we've done from designing and integrating entire flying platforms. That's been one area where we've spent quite a bit of time, to designing and integrating specific package payload procedures, right? So the operational aspect of it, how do you plan the flight routes and so on, and here in the U.S., we've done some, but we've had to go overseas to actually do some of the testing that we've done, primarily because although we've done quite a bit of work around aircraft that fit within Part 107. We're talking about over 55 pound type of aircraft, right? Where these aircraft are in some cases in the 70 to 80 pound range, all up weight, all up takeoff weight. So we're carrying up to 20 pounds, 2 mile type of range as far as complete milk run, for example. In one of the areas that we've spent quite a bit of time is in precision drops. So yes, landing the drone is one option, but from a technical perspective, there's a lot of risks around the moving props and so on. That's one portion of it, but GPS errors, right? So position-based navigation into a dedicated location has proven to be somewhat challenging, right? It's challenging, and so GPS sometimes gives us 10-meter errors. So the accuracy of how that landing occurs becomes a challenge, right? We've had the opportunity to test a number of different type of sensors, from IR lock to vision-based type of systems, to position the aircraft, quite well over its intended target. And that continues to be an area that, frankly, that is an area that needs further development, and it needs further work. And we've been spending quite a bit of time in that area, helping customers to understand what is the safest route for package drops. As you can see in some of these videos, we're not just dropping the package in the ground, we're actually placing the package inside of a delivery receptacle. So a completely different type of use case here. Likewise, public safety and other type of custom type of projects, we've done some work around the autonomy piece of it, right? Yes, the Part 107 aspect of it does still require having somebody in the picture, right? So from an application perspective, you need to have somebody there. But autonomy continues to grow, and here's a good example of what we're hearing a lot more here in the industry. It's around drone in the box, and so around that area, it's all about the deployment and the complete autonomy of the entire system. Whether you're pulling up on a pickup truck or you're looking to survey, for example, railroads. I know that was a topic mentioned earlier. You may have multiple stations around a railroad section, and then these individual drones basically cover a specific section, right? The drones can actually navigate and sometimes even hop between stations. But all of that technical aspect, that there are some plus and some minuses with it. And one of the biggest challenging is precision landing. Again, I keep bringing that up because precision landing, it's a technical challenge that that basically opens the door for a lot of the autonomous type of system operations. And, you know, we've had the opportunity to work in that space as well. A little bit about, you know, some of the companies and products we use. We work with Flightbase and their Flight Now product. Great public safety side of things. You can live stream multiple type of systems simultaneously, multiple drones. You know, gives you the precision landing aspect of it. And then you've got other type of companies that provide some fantastic products, you know, including I've kind of listed just a couple of my favorite platforms there, but there's certainly more, and, you know, I'll be happy to discuss offline with anybody. We also do education and training. Our core product is 100% online Part 107 training. It's embedded, it's being used in North Carolina community colleges, and right now actually in the high school. Our entire product is 100% online, so students can actually, you know, take the entire course. And one of the biggest benefits is very interactive. So, you know, the homeworks are graded. They have feedback and comments directly from industry. So companies like DJI, you know, and so on, they kind of give you a little bit of information around it. And our course is already basically ready for Moodle, Blackboard type of integration for those that are in universities and colleges. And in closing, a little bit about kind of what's coming up for us. What are we doing? We have, of course, our partners we will have some classes, particularly for Part 107 and the community colleges such as White Tech, Forsyth Tech. And we have demos coming up and some flight testing, both here, primarily here in the Raleigh, Greensboro, Durham area, around public safety demos on the autonomous precision landing and takeoff and multi camera display, as well as more delivery test trials. Of course, you know, these are all done under Part 107 initially, just primarily for the testing aspect of it. But that's it on my end. I appreciate the time, guys, and I'll turn it back to you, Ronnie. Sorry, can you hear me? I don't think I can hear you.
There we go.
There.
So thank you so much, Will, for being here and talking about the company, and we really appreciate that. Guys, it's 5:35, and what I'd like to do is, before we leave today, first off, I would like to ask if our officers, a couple of our officers that have not gotten a chance to speak or anything, but Kiana and Bafika, if you guys are here and you would like to say anything, introduce yourselves, please feel free. And I know we can, I think, Nicole, if you can swap over to that screen.
I'm trying to figure out myself while
Oh,
I'm
okay.
here.
No problem. No problem.
Some reason Zoom won't let me go back into the window.
But while we're doing that, if either of you guys are on and would like to introduce yourselves, please feel free.
Hey everyone, this is Kiana Wells. I'm the new Education Outreach Coordinator for AUVSI in North Carolina. Just wanted to say that I'm excited to join the team, and let's get started on promoting education.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I am Bhavika Ani. I am also a new member of AUVSI North Carolina. I'm a communications coordinator, and it was a great session today. And I hope to moderate and be a part of these kind of sessions in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. So guys, without further ado, I will take this chance to open up the floor. If there's anybody that would like to ask questions of our moderators or any of our presenters that are still on, if you guys would like to close with any questions or that you may have for Ashley or Andrew or any of our speakers, we'll let you guys ask those now. I know there were several posted in the chat section, and we wanted to give you guys a chance. And I know some of our presenters have left, but if our moderators feel comfortable answering it, we'll go to that. So if you have any questions, let us know.
Riley, I have a quick question.
Yes, ma'am.
This is for you, Will. Your last slide mentioned you were hiring. Do you want to give us some information on what sort of positions you're hiring?
Sure. Yes. Primarily somebody with drone experience, of course, that's a big plus, but not so much DJI products. We tend to get a lot of folks that's their primary experience, and for a lot of the new technical type of operations, you got to have a little bit of a software background, RDU pilot based type of integration of systems. One of the things, as you guys may be aware of, the industry is seeing a bit of a shift from the typical DJI platform into other type of platforms, whether it be specific US built systems, and even for delivery type of systems, larger payload aircraft. You're talking about an integration of embedded computers and things like that. So those are the type of people that we'd love to talk to, and have them come over and support us for some of these projects. Thank you.
Great, thanks for sharing.
I have a question here for folks who are on the call. What's your thought about the recurrency exam that you gave online for your Part 107? If anyone has given recently, what are your thoughts about it? Do you see that this is something that is good, or is this making it even more simple for people to be commercial operators? Just thoughts, not a question really.
Sean, this is Wayne. I've heard very positive comments about how easy it is and educational and saving money.
So Wayne, as an instructor, is this something that you see your students, benefiting from every time they do it, or for those who were going back to taking the test, through the test center, did that help better? What's your thought on that?
Yes, especially for the new rules coming up. I think people are looking for convenience. They're still having to study. They're still getting knowledge from the work they're doing online. So I think with that, and also just saving that money, having to go back and do the recurrent, I really believe that they're learning more about flying and the regs that go with it.
Wayne, I just took the test the day it came out, the recurrent, actually the day. And what surprised me was there was not much on sectionals. That really surprised me. And since I'm not a man pilot, I'm really not at my sectionals all the time. So my company doesn't fly all the time. I'm up on the sectionals. I know how to read them, but I was surprised that there was not more on that. Do you have any comment on that?
I think it's part of our professional development to study the charts, understand them. So to me is that I'm doing it weekly when I'm out teaching. Good feedback though.
I'll chime in because that is a subject of discussion right now with our classes, and we a lot of until you're actually in a scenario-based type of situation, right? Right now, Part 107 really only gives you the basics, right? This is some of the things you need to know, but until you're actually doing it, and frankly, the way I'm envisioning, and perhaps I'm on left field right here, is the fact that we need to have a certification section for future unmanned pilots, right? Because the typical inspection where you're in front of the aircraft, seeing the aircraft, that's one thing. But as the industry continues to evolve, especially really in many cases, we're going to be evolving in a way where the pilot is not in the loop anymore, right? It's going to be, and I deal with this every day, is now the autonomy portion of it. So the pilot is no longer there, but the systems integration piece of it, it will demand a certain understanding of the location of where these missions are going to occur, right? So even though there's a lot of autonomy that's coming into the picture, the planning portion of it, of how these systems are placed and implemented and by certain business in certain locations, will require mission scenario-based type of understanding. And to your point, missing airspace information or kind of getting a little more in depth into that area, it's a bit concerning.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, Will. One of the things that I'm not going to mention the company, we all know it. It was making the marketing was, it's like you don't have to be a pilot anymore, and that disturbed me. That marketing disturbed me because we do, like Wayne says, we got to know our stuff regardless of the automation. And I think it's a scary premise to say, hey, look, they got great product and all, there's no doubt about it. But to talk about that, training pilots and not training pilots, I think that's going down the wrong path. Wayne is absolutely on target. He teaches this stuff, and we got to keep teaching. We got to keep educating pilots, regardless of what kind of autonomy is coming out there. Because look, the drone is not responsible. We are as a remote pilots in command.
So John, that brings up a great point. And again, I apologize, this doesn't affect your state, but one big thing that we are super excited about with the North Carolina Public Safety Drone Academy, as you guys have heard me speak on numerous panels and different things of how we've done this here in North Carolina, and it's free for public safety guys to take our classes. And we offer tons of different UAS and unmanned classes. One thing that we're excited to announce is that we are partnering with 3 entities across the state, 3 larger institutions, to where we'll be expanding our academy across the state. Right now, we've been so tied up with going to individual departments and agencies that we feel like we've done a disservice to guys who want to come to us and take classes because we've been doing so much at other departments, and that's where kind of we specialize in. But we're merging with 3 other institutions. One institution will be I can't say a lot right now because it's in development, but it'll be a landmark for North Carolina. It's going to be exciting. There's going to be major players in North Carolina, a lot of major activity there. But the other 2 institutions will be, equally awesome, I guess we could say. But like you said, John, what we're looking at is training those pilots with scenario-based training, the education for book work, the education for classroom, but really putting their knowledge to the test by putting them in large-scale scenario-based training, which is what we like to focus on. But where we're able to, with these 3 institutions, is we will be bringing the man side into the house. And I think Ben's still on here. If he is, I'm going to kind of just use him as an example. But, as Ben Spain, the project manager for Division Aviation, is a manned C-130 pilot with the Air Force, is bringing these guys together and say, hey, how can we work together? We already offer classes on communication, and we offer classes on these teams working together. But if we can bring them together in classroom settings and then scenario-based training, it's just building our state. And we're very fortunate in North Carolina. You've heard me say that a lot in a lot of different scenarios. But when you've got people like Will, and you've got people like Wayne and Dash, and there's several of us that teach around the state, we're just very lucky. We've got people like Ben who are manned pilots, but now working unmanned, and they see both sides of the coin. It's very, very important. But John, you bring up a great point, and Will as well, is education and training have got to stay relevant. And we've got to change with the times. We've got to change with the technologies. I know Wayne talks about this a lot. And again, I apologize for saying this. Dash is probably laughing as soon as I say this. I've said this at numerous places across the state and across the U.S. is our Part 107 is just a license to learn. You're just scratching the surface, and we've got to dive deeper into it. And I'm sure I'll let Wayne and Will speak on this. And I know Dash and I have talked about it a lot. I wholeheartedly feel that we are coming to an era to where you're going to have to prove that you can fly at some point. Like a driver's ed course, you've got to prove that you can do it. Because if not, I just don't know that the manned side will take us serious. And that's something that we're looking at.
That's interesting that you're saying. I want to make this announcement to my fellow colleagues here. I've been doing this with you guys for several months now, and I've decided to join the Civil Air Patrol. And it is the Long Island chapter, NY207, and I'm going into their drone program. So as most of us know, that the Civil Air Patrol is the auxiliary of the U.S. Air Force. So they get tested regularly. This is a good organization. I vetted them out. They're great, and I'm moving into that this year. I've already been accepted, and I'm on board and moving into their drone program. My question to you, Riley, is how involved are you with your Civil Air Patrol, and are they doing drones down there? I could easily find that out, but I'm just wondering if you guys connected with them.
They are. Three of my pilots, now
Great.
I will say this, we have a host of instructors. It's not just me traveling around the state going, oh, this is how you do drones. And Wayne can attest to this, so can Dash. We'll talk to somebody like Will and say, hey, Will, you're a subject matter expert. We'd love to come and let you teach this class. Or find somebody that is their wheelhouse. So three of my instructors, which I have a very large cadre of instructors, are Civil Air Patrol in North Carolina. So they are manned pilots. They teach unmanned aviation for the Civil Patrol here. So yes, long story short, Civil Air Patrol is aware of unmanned. They are doing some classes, some training. They're letting us come present to them on what's going on across the state. So I would say that I don't want to say they're super, super active, but they are definitely getting more active in the state.
Okay.
Hey, Riley, this is Wayne. I was going to say is that I just did a class for the Civil Air Patrol and the Asheville Wing and run around, I guess it was 9 folks through the class, and they were not manned pilots. And so they were wanting to start up the drone side of it, but there's an in-house process that they're using to certify them. Once they get their 107, then the higher ups take them over and start doing scenario-based training using the birds that they have in-house.
Yep, Wayne is correct. That's exactly what's going on. And I'm becoming a part of that. And my mission, personal mission for them, is to become one of their instructors.
Absolutely. And I know Wayne can back me up on this. We've got a couple of pilots that are UAS pilots, but they're also manned pilots, and they're super excited because they started with Civil Air Patrol, and now they are running emergency service missions and certain emergency management. So one of my head pilots, he's got a fixed wing. He's a pilot, and now he's merged from not only flying UAS, that he's flying his personal airplane, which has now been deemed by the state of North Carolina is on call for emergency management. So he's flying and giving eyes on for things like that. So you're starting to see a lot of your Civil Air Patrol buy into it a lot more and get more involved. So it is an exciting time.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Wayne.
Riley, I'll just throw out is that with the Civil Air Patrol starting their drone unit, what you're starting to see is that communication and trust between the manned pilots and the drone pilots, to where they'll be able to fly together while they're working at 100-foot AGL. They'll have the pilots up above doing the same thing and not requiring them to land because there's a drone in the sky. Working together, trusting each other is going to be huge, and I think they're going to be able to show a lot of us that it can be done.
Absolutely.
Amen, Wayne. Amen.
Yeah, I'll chime on that subject. We've done some flights, particularly overseas, where in the case of the Caribbean Civil Aviation, they've they initially put us right next to an airport in one of our tests, and the first flags goes up and we say, no, we can't fly right there. And they said, no, we want you flying there. And we want to see how the interaction occurs between, we're inbound and into, the main airstrip, and we're flying, an over 55-pound aircraft in that area. So how do you manage, the airspace? What is the emergency response and so on? And it was very interesting to see the engagement from their folks to, out there in the field with us, looking at it, having direct communication with the tower and the pilots and so on. Very interesting. And to your point, the communication piece of it, understanding how everything works from operationally, there's nothing like it. And so I think we need to be more, to Riley's point, more scenario based in the future in those type of situations.
No, Will speaks on a good point. One of the best classes that we run, we have in my cadre, we have a fixed wing airplane, and we also have access to a helicopter. And what we do is we put unmanned pilots on the ground. We put both the helicopter and the plane in the air at the same time. We'll fly a scenario based on either search and rescue or, something large scale. And we will use aviation radios, and we will spend a whole day before the practical on telling these teams how to communicate best with your manned pilots. And then we'll put that to the test the next day. And we'll spend all day going over those scenarios on how they work together. That's the only way these guys are going to get used to it.
Couldn't agree. Yep, that's awesome.
Any other questions, guys? It's 5:55. I know we're reaching that 6 o'clock moment. John, thank you for your great questions as always. We can't thank you enough. You're always great on here. You always bring great points of view. Will, Wayne, I know Wayne, you're on here a lot, but Will, thank you so much for today. We hope this is something you'll continue to be a part of. You bring a wealth of knowledge too. I've not officially met you, but I've definitely heard your name in several circles, and this is great. It's just this is what it's all about, is meeting each other and starting to build those relationships. But you guys have been great today. Thank you so much.